some time for this. I appreciate it. I'm excited about you speaking on Friday morning at the 2024 conference, and I'm glad that you're making some time for me tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll always make time for you, Steve.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so actually, at the recording of this, you're the board. You're not only on the board of CCHF, but you're the board chair. So you're the boss of me, and you've been a great board member and a great board chair. And I'm not saying that just to flatter you, but
thank you.
I'm excited for the rest of CCHF to be more exposed to you and how God has sort of shaped you and the things that God's put in your heart. So
I appreciate this opportunity. It has been like a true joy serving on this board.
It
really
is fun, isn't it?
It's just an incredible group of people, and I feel really just privileged that I've had this like part of life to share space with them and people I would not have known as deeply without the board. I'm very thankful to have known them.
So I visit a lot of clinics and I talk to a lot of leaders, and the truth is that there's a handful of boards out there that I think are just really exceptional boards, but I think CCHF's board is an exceptional board, don't you?
I do too.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing people and very dedicated. I mean, it's really great. But, you've been serving on the board. Now you're board chair. Board chair has a different perspective on what a good board member is.
It does. I think it's also just informed my work in our clinic, just understanding what goes into being a good board member and a good board chair. I've enjoyed the experience, too, of just seeing the other side.
What makes a good board member?
It's a great question. I think, coming both from someone that serves a board of directors and then being on a board, I think first and foremost is just the trust and confidence in the people that do the work. And so for us, that's you and our staff. And I just continue to come back to that my job, first and foremost, is to make sure that you and the staff feel totally supported and have what you need to live out our mission. And I think, and on paper, what a board does is they protect the mission of the organization and they oversee the budget of the organization, and then they directly oversee the CEO. But those are on paper. But I think underneath those tasks is this desire to say, God has placed people in these roles, and we have been a part of choosing and placing the people that are in these roles, and that is our job to make sure that they are cared for and supported in a way that allows them to live out their gifting to its full potential.
What made you want to be a nurse?
So when I was growing up, I grew up in Iowa, in a relatively small town in the Midwest, and I was really passionate about really kind of social justice issues. So I spent a lot of time writing my senator's letters, and I didn't really know what kind of job that would become. And I heard about a free clinic that was going to open in the basement of a church in my neighborhood. Really? And so, I was in high school. I had very little skills to offer. But I signed right up, and they let me do really cool things. Like I reorganized the medical supply closet. It was a big moment. And then I helped
That's
with...
an important job,
It was. I literally felt so excited that someone had trusted me to do just anything that might be helpful. And I remember signing people in on clipboards, and I didn't grow up with anyone in my family or extended family that was in medicine at all. So, other than having my own checkups as a kid, this was the first time I saw health providers in action. And I was just amazed. It was also an eye-opening experience to me that people needed a free clinic one night a week in a church basement. And those two realities just changed my whole life. So I was I have to figure out how you be one of them. I didn't even know what degree all of these people had, right? So I started just asking, where do you work during the day? And what did you do to get this job? And one of the women that came every single week was a nurse practitioner. And I got to know her over the years of volunteering in high school. And she just really talked about what nursing had meant to her life and the philosophy of care and why she did what she did. And I said, that sounds like what I want to do in life. So I started looking at schools and figured out how you go to nursing school. And that's where I started.
How did you get to Atlanta?
So I had just finished my undergrad, and I had, during college, gotten involved in went to a different state. So, and then I was working with another startup free clinic, also in another church basement, ironically, but in a different state, and had gotten involved in some of the policy work in the state of Minnesota. And I thought, we're not going to be able to fix all of the healthcare problems just by seeing patients, it turns out. So I was like, okay, bummer. I got that wrong. That's okay. I still love seeing patients, but I'm going to have to know more. And at that point, I decided the best thing I could learn was to better understand health policy and figure out how we make sure everyone has insurance. So that was my next logical step. So I looked at where were there programs where I could do my graduate work to be a nurse practitioner and do a master's in public health. And at the time, there were only 3 schools that that had that. It was Emory, Johns Hopkins, and Columbia. So I was like, well, I guess I'll apply to those 3 schools. And Emory offered me scholarship money. So it was, I was 22, we were getting married, we had no money, so we followed where the scholarship was and fell in love with Atlanta.
First off, there's so many parts of that story I love. Like, I love the fact that, here's this little, almost invisible free clinic that's in a church basement someplace. It's honestly, let's just be truthful, like, that's not sort of what we aspire medicine to look like.
Sure.
But praise God for those guys, and like that led to you developing a mentor and having a vision for this, and then scholarships are good things. We have students at the conference every year because people give us, they fund opportunities for students to come because they don't have any money to come, and so many of them, like, we track them, and somewhere well in above 80% of the students that come to the conference here and who do a rotation at a CCHF clinic end up working in this type of work because there's something that resonates. There's a calling.
Yep.
When did you have that sense of, like, from a faith perspective, that sense of calling in all of that?
That's a good question. I don't have like this one moment in time that I knew for sure that was a calling. Probably the most specific moment for me is I was already in nursing school, and I had kind of decided that medicine was my kind of step for the future. And I had gone to this public forum. I had driven the 45 minutes to the Twin Cities to, get more involved. And I remember that the question of this forum was on potential cuts to the program that funded HIV medication. And this was not a religious organization. It had no religious theme to it. And I remember that a man stood up, and I remember him saying, that he's like, I don't know where else to say this, but I just want to say right now that I feel like the people that keep telling me to, like, love God or trust God are the same people that really want to make sure the funding for my medicine goes away. And I cried the whole 45-minute ride home because it was just, for me, I grew up in the church, and it was just this moment of being like, wait, how could that be true? How could the church not be on the side of making sure this man has life-saving medicine? And I think that moment, and then many, many, many others that followed, just helped awaken me that, like, the church is also broken. Jesus is not, and I am daily thankful for that. But that it helped me better understand that, like, part of my journey needs to be understanding how much I don't know and how much brokenness I will bring into the world if I don't get my heart right and unpack those things I didn't know and those biases. And so I think for me, that moment really changed how I approached my career, even though it wasn't necessarily the moment I chose to go into nursing.
So you go to Emory, and somehow or another you connect with Good Samaritan Health Services of Atlanta.
That's
Dr. Bill
that's
Warren.
a good story if you want it.
I do, yeah, please.
So I got to Emory, and I think my story is mostly a story of, like, me getting things wrong. So I've gotten out of undergrad, and I'm in this dual degree program, and I'm like, we are going to fix healthcare. Like, we are going to get everybody insured, and that is going to fix it. And I graduated, and I started at a free clinic. There's a theme here as well, right?
Right.
And this one was a full-time clinic, but I was the second provider hired, so it was a small clinic, and it was right down the street from where we lived, and I loved it. I loved what I was doing, but the clinic had been started with kind of a very kind of small vision, and there wasn't a lot of interest in the board or other people involved in kind of growing that and expanding that care. And I just remember talking to patients and thinking, but I learned the guidelines, but no one ever told me what to do when you can't get the medicine, or no one ever told me what to do when someone can't move out of a toxic environment because there isn't affordable housing.
Right.
Or it's different to talk about nutrition when you're thinking about the cost of food and food storage. And so at that point, I kind of made a couple decisions. One is I decided that I once again had not fully understood what it means to help people live healthy lives, that it wasn't just getting insurance or having the ability to write a prescription. And I was also reaching a point where I wanted to do more in that space and feeling like I was working 60 hours a week and no one was getting better. So as I was at this point, I went on behalf of that other clinic to accept a grant. And there was a lot of grant recipients in the room, and there was like a little, kind of mingle, and I didn't know anybody. And at this point, I'm like 24, 25. So these people all look way intimidating. So I'm just kind of standing by myself, like, let me get this check and go home. And Dr. Warren, the founder of Good Samaritan, comes over and, starts talking to me, and he's like, all right, how many patients do you see? Oh, you speak Spanish? How long have you been speaking Spanish? What kind of, just boom, 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 boom. And I just thought maybe this is how people mingle at these medicine events. I don't know. Seems normal to me. It is. That's exactly right. But, after about 10 minutes of this kind of rapid fire pseudo interview, he said, I have a provider leaving. Would you come interview? And I just kind of smiled politely, and in my head was like, no, I'm at this clinic, I was called to do this kind of work. And I remember going home and telling my husband about this and how funny is that, and he was like, hon, I just want to say that it seems like you've been praying constantly about that the place you're at just isn't working and you don't know where to go next, and then this happens out of the blue, and
Could be a God thing.
maybe you should consider. So I went to the real interview this time, and then I've been there ever since. I've been at Good Samaritan 14 years.
14 years.
And I love it.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So were they in their were they in the place where you are now? They had just moved
Yeah,
about
so
that
they
time.
had their 1-year anniversary in the new building shortly after I was hired.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when they built that. For my first visit to them was when they were in the old Pirates Museum or whatever it was. But, Dr. Warren is an amazing visionary guy,
Absolutely.
and he just makes things happen. And, they built that building to do a lot more than medicine.
Mm-hmm. I mean, before people were using terms like social determinants of health, Dr. Warren has this vision of understanding that health is more than medicine, and had the foresight to create a space that we didn't have the plans for. We didn't have the funding or the drawings to build the teaching kitchen upstairs, but the walls were there with the vision, and the idea was to look for an area, first, an area of need, second, close to public transportation, but third, that there was enough space to someday build a farm, and now we have one, and someday have a market, and now we have one.
It was a junkyard before,
a literal junkyard.
It was a literal junkyard and a kind of a dead-end street.
Mm-hmm. It's
into
still
this
a dead-end street.
Yeah.
That hasn't changed.
And now there's an urban farm there, and you guys, do y'all do prescriptions for food? Do you?
So we actually run 3 seasons a year a daily farmers market for patients and community, and so we do food vouchers, which is a similar idea to a food prescription, but then also just sell at cost to the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing place and a beautiful place too. I mean, it's. I have, in a lot of my presentations, when I talk about the kind of neighborhoods that we, where we serve, I literally stood in front of that building and took pictures of the, vacant buildings across the street and that kind of thing. I mean, it was just, when nothing else looked nice in that neighborhood, like they built this beautiful facility that just screams dignity.
Yes. Yes.
And it's a kind of place that you'd be proud. It's not
right.
the church basement one night a week. And
it sure is not.
Again, not pooing on that, but just saying, this is what we're, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful thing. This is a great picture of what it's supposed to be like.
Yeah.
So
people are getting the care they deserve because they are people created by God. And our goal, we actually, a lot of when we give tours, people will say, well, this is, nicer than the clinic I go to. Or I think a lot of what we do too is just change perspective on like what are free and charitable care clinics, but also what do people that aren't accessing some of the private practices or mainstream practices, what kind of care can they receive and should they receive? So it's a reminder that like this is possible and we shouldn't settle for anything less.
Well, and it's inspired a lot of different free and charitable clinics and even other types of models of clinics all over the sort of North Georgia and and greater Atlanta area, many of which are called Good Samaritan of something, Good Samaritan of this county or that county or whatever. And they're great ministries. They're all very different. Yeah. They're all very different. They're unique to the communities that they are serving and unique to the personalities of the founders and the teams of people that God's assembled to run those things. And but it didn't just stop with this one idea, with this one building, with this one ministry. And it's great that you've been a part of that for this long. I didn't realize that you'd been there that long. So.
It has been an honor to continue to work there and learn from Dr. Warren, my patients, the staff.
So you're going to speak in day after tomorrow at the in the one of the morning plenary sessions, and I know that you're going to talk about a little bit about the story of the woman who's healed of bleeding, who presses through the crowd and touches Jesus. What about that story really resonates with you, and kind of why do you feel like that is a story God wants to speak to the CCHF community about?
For a long time, that's been my favorite story of healing in the Bible. And I think as I prayed, and you asked me to speak quite a while ago, so I've had a lot of time to think and pray that story just kept coming back. It's in 3 of the Gospels, and each Gospel, there's a little differences, but not much. It's the only healing story that describes like power leaving Jesus. It's just
it's a weird statement, isn't it?
But
he felt it, what is that like?
I mean, I love it because like she right away reminds me both of my patients and of myself, right? Like she is desperate and like she has one goal, and it's to get this healing because she has been bleeding and it has changed her life. And she's decided that like Jesus is the answer. And she's also figured out that her chances of getting to Jesus are slim to none. She's not ceremoniously clean. No one's going to help her get there. So she sneaks through this crowd. She's like, I'm just going to touch him and then I'm going to run away. Like she had no plan that we know of following that other than to try to get healed and not get caught. And I just think like how many of us approach healing and how many of us approach Jesus that way, like in desperation, and we're sneaking in.
I just need my one little problem solved.
And often it's those patients that come in and they do all the quote unquote wrong things. They're manipulating, or they're only showing up late, or they only come as a walk-in. And those are so often the folks that need us the most, right? Yeah. So right away, I'm like, this is us. This is our story. But the story goes on to say that, Jesus knows that power has left him. And I mean, he's God. Jesus knows who did it. But he turns and he says, who touches me? And the disciples are like, come on, Jesus. Like, we are in a crowd. There is a dying girl we're on the way to save. Right. Like, we don't have time for this. And let's
we
not.
got a schedule. This is not on this.
Don't we always have a schedule at the clinic, right? But Jesus finds her, and he sees her in this crowd. And he calls her out, and he says, daughter. First she falls on her knees, and she says, it was me. This is what happened. But he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Yeah. And I think like there's 2 things, and what I'll spend most of my time Friday morning talking about is one is that like Jesus gives her a new story. Like she left not just being healed, but she left with a transformed life, because Jesus saw her and Jesus knew her. And that often while we are in the business of medicine and healing, we often can't heal. I'm never going to touch someone and cure them of bleeding for 12 years. It's not going to happen. And most of my,
It will tomorrow.
Right. Most of my day is spent managing conditions I can't cure.
That's right.
But Jesus is also in the business of helping people claim a new story, and we can always be in that business, right? Like Jesus gave me a new story, he gave you a new story.
Wow.
And that is just such, like, that's who I want to be, whether it's going in for an HR discussion or going into a patient's room, that like something if I could glove them, if I could touch them, if I could see them, if I can remember something about them, that each of those pieces that help people rewrite their stories creates abilities for healing that are transformative to their life, even when I can't cure their physical illness.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, to just, to realize that we're in a position where we can become maybe the door for a person to start a whole new story.
Right.
And to start it in an encounter with Jesus, hopefully through us or not, but here, and this is what we're about. I think that's beautiful. That's great.
Yeah. And I think the other takeaway for me that, and I often feel like anytime whether it's leading our staff devotion in the morning or something like this, I feel like God often is like, you should talk about things that like maybe you need to work on. That seems to be like a recurring theme. And I think for me, the takeaway too that I keep coming back to is that like she was satisfied with just being healed. That's all she could imagine, and that's all she went for. And she got so much more. Yeah. And I feel like God keeps telling me, like, what if you prayed? What if you acted? What if you lived like I can do more than you can ever imagine? Because I should, because he is that big of a God. And so I feel like for me, that's been this challenge that story continues to speak into my life that says, grow your faith.
I have a healing story. A lot of people have heard that. And I get people ask me all the time, like, you have such a powerful testimony. And it's like, my testimony is not that I got healed. My testimony is that I went through this and I met Jesus in a way I'd never, like, I'd known the Lord and I followed him for a long time, but like, there's just something deeper that happened in me during that time that I'd go through it again for that, it was amazing. Like my walk, I was transformed in my walk with the Lord because of that. And that's not what I expected at all. I just wanted a few more years to, do stuff. And I'm cancer free, but, and praise God for that. But it's the lanyap, it's the something more that God always surprises us with. You and Veronica Squires wrote this book, How Neighborhoods Make Us Sick, Restoring Health and Wellness to Our Communities. It's a great book, by the way.
Thanks.
I love this book.
Thank you. And
we've given a lot of these out, and we've sold a lot of these. I hope it's doing really well because it's a great book on social determinants of health and understanding it both from a medical perspective and also from a sociological perspective, but also from a faith perspective. And it's an InterVarsity, book, IV Press. And, like, how did that become like you said, you went to Emory because it was one of 3 schools that offered what you were trying to get plus the Master's in Public Health, like what?
Right. So
talk about that a minute.
As I had decided at my first job that I'd gotten this wrong once again, in addition to going to Good Sam, I also did my doctorate in nursing practice, and specifically went to an institution and focused on a research track, what I didn't know at the time, but then came into contact with this like whole body of research around social determinants of health.
Yeah.
And it started to put the pieces together for me about what I was seeing clinically, and then what is the real story behind ongoing health disparities in the U.S., and what really makes someone healthy. And I think that really changed kind of what I consider my ongoing learning journey to better understand health equity and what it looks like to build that. So, when Veronica and I were working together at Good Samaritan Health Center, she had experience previously with InterVarsity and said, I've had this idea of writing a book about some of her lived experience of moving into a community and really struggling there. And just saying, how she felt like Good Sam was such a vision of a solution. And I said, that'd be great. I would read that. And she was like, well, would you help more than that? And I said, I will, but I said, as much as I love Good Sam, if we're going to write a book about why people aren't getting healthy, then we need to tell the whole truth as best we know it. And we need to unpack that Good Samaritan is not the solution. It's one piece of a much bigger issue.
There's a lot in here about partnerships and things like that.
And so our goal was to say, what can we combine just the truth of our own narratives, our own stories of being people that got it wrong and learned and are journeying to do it better, and can we combine that with kind of this large, really important academic work around social determinants, and just didn't see a lot out there that did that in a storytelling form. Because what we said is, at the end of the day, if we are going to change health equity, it's not the academics or even the providers that need to be convinced. It's everyday people who are making decisions about where they live and how they engage in policy practices and how they think about the world and who they know as their neighbors. And that this book was kind of our offering to say, hey, we didn't do it right and we still don't have all the answers, but can we find a meaningful way through our stories and experiences to tell this other story about, what are social determinants in a way that makes sense for just anybody who's looking at their neighborhood or their patients or their church and thinking, like, what's going wrong?
I know this is really like a major passion of yours, and, I think about your sort of entrance into faith-based, healthcare for people who are experiencing poverty, being, the small little, one night a week clinic and that kind of thing. Like and now you're the board chair of CCHF, and we're, I described this at our board meeting earlier today, as being this weird cartoon character that's like this tall, but with a gigantic footprint,
I
like,
that image.
And we have a big footprint. Over 2 million people in the United States in 2024 depend on a CCHF clinic for their primary care. But like, what's your vision for this? How are you, like, I want you to use CCHF as a platform to promote this, but like, how would you encourage some of these smaller clinics that are just getting started and they got no funding for this kind of thing? What would you, I don't know, what?
That's a great question. So I think probably my encouragement and then my vision, two separate things perhaps. But for encouragement, I think that the story of that book is just that none of us are going to ever fix it all. But collectively, there are really beautiful models out there that are changing lives and changing communities, and that sometimes that change that's incubated at very small scales becomes the pilot for massive change. And one of my favorite parts of writing the book is we said, we don't want a book that's just about the problems. So we said we are going to make sure that there's an equal number of pages, literally, devoted to solutions. And we just started interviewing people doing cool things in and outside of healthcare. And that was my favorite part of writing the book. But just, I was struck over and over again by this, like, a group of people saw a problem, started talking with the community, those closest to the problem, said, what do we do? What do you need? How do we work together to fix this? Piloted something new and sometimes seemingly crazy, and then how that momentum built to really change approaches. And I think that can be an encouragement to anyone, whether it's starting a small clinic or a new program or launching something outside of healthcare that's transformative to people's well-being. Is this idea that what you create small, God can make huge.
Yeah.
And then I think for my vision is one of kind of my favorite lasting and ongoing kind of impacts of the book, because we published at the beginning of 2019, is that several schools use the book in classes, which hadn't ever been part of when we wrote it, we imagined.
Cool?
And so we get called once in a while to join Zoom classes with
That's
these
awesome.
students. And I just think, like, man, if I'd known a little bit earlier in life what it took me so much longer to learn, like how many more years could I have done better work? Like how many patients would be even better off because I would have addressed my biases or been more thoughtful in some of my approaches than I was when I started. And I just have a lot of hope that if we have younger generations that are already hearing this narrative that says maybe what we were told about poverty isn't true, maybe how we understand racism in healthcare was wrong. And it was, right? And so, like, if they are hearing that truth sooner, like, how much more of their lives and career and energy can they spend on advancing those solutions than generations that spent, a significant amount of time unlearning, relearning, just to finally get there. And so I think for me that is the hope, is that each time we learn, and whether we learn from mistakes or we learn from something that went well, the better we do about making sure our new and emerging younger leaders and providers journey that with us, that we can help make sure that movement outlives what we can accomplish in our lifetimes.
That's awesome. I think I've said that's awesome too many times in this interview, but it's awesome. Okay, and I'm encouraged. Like I'm so optimistic for the future, in spite of the fact that our nation's falling apart, and in spite of the fact that everything's broken and fractured, and we're getting it wrong a million times. There is a generation that's coming up, and I see them coming in the next 5 or 6 years in mass to just say, hey, we got ideas, we're watching what you're doing. That's great. We can take it further. And I really think that that's what's going to happen. And so I think I'm happy to be a little bit of a part of amplifying your voice for this, because I think this is what we should be doing. I think it's prophetic, to be honest. In that, I don't know, don't be flattered by that, but but I really do. I think there's a timing that God has raised you up for this kind of thing, and I'm happy that we're part of it.
Me too. And I think one final thing that I think is important for me when I think about the book is that it very much never felt, when writing it or even speaking on it, that that was, my wisdom, but that was that those types of lessons were by people that really questioned disparities before anyone else made it acceptable to do those. Those are lessons that my patients were gracious enough to teach me. I think over and over again about how many times in the exam room, I'm not sure who's caring for who. That these patients come in with an incredible lived experience and knowledge that transcends and is so much more than any of mine. And I feel like sometimes the best thing I can do is just be a conduit of that type of wisdom, and then help put that into words that some of us that don't have those stories or narratives can start to understand, so that we can change too. So I feel like it's very much lessons learned because of just the graciousness of people that are willing to share a piece of themselves. And I'm always struck in the clinic by just that it is a gift.
It is.
Each time a patient chooses to share a story.
It is.
It is a gift unlike anything else I experience.
Yeah, it shapes us. God uses them in our lives as much as He uses us in theirs, at least.
At least.
And on its very best day, it's a reciprocal relationship, and I think that's something I hope people really understand. And we don't always do that. I don't think they teach you that in medical school so much, So. But listen, it's late, and I know that you've had a long day today. We had a board meeting you flew here and got here this morning. Like, I mean, it's been a long day, and so I appreciate you making time to do this tonight. And I'm proud that you're leading CCHF's board, and I'm really happy. I want to encourage people that hear this. You've done a number of workshops at CCHF over the years, and every one of them have been stellar and on different topics. Several on social determinants of health, and they should watch your plenary session, which will be published by the time this goes out, and they can look up and listen to some of the workshops that you've done, and they should make a trip to Atlanta.
Yes.
Which is a cool city.
It is a great
when
city.
they do, one of the coolest things is to go to visit Good Sam in Atlanta and see what amazing things are happening there. They'll be inspired. I always am whenever I go. So. And
every time someone visits, I'm also learning at the same time. I love learning and letting people come tour. So please do come.
Well, listen, give my love to Dr. Warren when you get back.
Absolutely.